Okay, moving forward. Welcome back to part 4. This is the section where we do the CSS of all our site. So if you're really looking for the WordPress stuff, you might want to skip to part 5. But if you want to know how to convert an entire site, this is a big part of it. We need to take care of the CSS. So I'm going to open up Coda again. And we have our style. Let's close out this images folder. We have our style.css, and this is where all of our styling is going to go. But what I want to do now is I'm going to come back, open this folder up, open index.html in our browser, and we're going to do this. If you guys watch my tutorials on net.touch plus, you know I like to use Firebug and the web developer toolbar. So I'm going to go up to View, Toolbars, and enable this. Now, it's not going to be on your browser by default. If you would like to use it, just do a Google for Web Developer Toolbar. It's only for Firefox, and it'll allow you to, it allows for a plethora of abilities like disabling JavaScript, editing CSS, adding rulers, outlines. It's really a fantastic program. And this way, we can edit it, and you can see exactly what each bit of code is doing. So to edit CSS, I'm going to go to this tab, and I'm going to hit Edit CSS, or I can hit Shift-Command-E. All right. So let's close this out a little bit. Now the first step is I personally like to use a reset. By default, browsers come with some of their own styling that can kind of toy with you if you don't know exactly what you're doing. So I'm going to use a reset to zero everything out. That way we have a blank canvas. And I already have something. This is pretty much just a slightly modified version of Eric Meyer's reset. So you see it pretty much grabs a ton of elements. It sets the margin and padding and border and outline to 0. It sets the font size to 100%. Body, I've set a line height to 1.5. And this is, by the way, not part of Eric Meyer's reset. But I've set the font family. We're going to be using Helvetica, and then Arial, and then sans serif as a fallback. And then I've removed the bullets from list items. So you can see here, before, after. All right, everything's zeroed out. So we need to make sure that we comment this as best as possible. So what I'm going to do, because when you come back to this a few months down the road, trust me, you're not going to remember. You might remember this section, but not others. So let's just do reset. All right, and we can even do end reset. It's very important that you comment your projects as best as possible, especially even if you're working on a team. So the first thing I want to do is let's set, I know I'm using a lot of H2 tags, like let's say these are H2 tags, right? They're a little small, so why don't I reset them? Remember, with this reset, we set all heading 2 tags, or all heading tags to a font size of 100%. That's why all the text is the same size. So I'm going to add my own value back in. Let's do font size, 27 pixels. All right. Next, let's set up, and this is more general styling. So we could say, we could comment that. I'm not going to bother with that for now. Within our P tag, let's set a font size, a base font size of, we'll be working with pixels, 14 pixels. And then a little more for anchor tags. If we come on down, here's some anchor tags. I hate that underline in the blue, so let's get rid of that. So let's do text decoration is none. And also, let's set a color. Now, the color I've chosen is going to be 4E. So how did I get this value? I go into Photoshop, and you zoom in, or you just grab the text. I'm going to click on this, see if I can find it. Let's click on this text layer. Well, shoot. Somehow that got rasterized. So let's just use our eyedropper tool, grab that value, and then I would get that, copy it, bring it back, and paste it in. 4E. Okay? Anything else? Yeah, let's also set a font size. Let's specify a font size of 14 pixels as well, just in case. All right, that looks much better. But also, we do want to give the user some idea that it's a link. So let's add that underline back in when they hover over it. Done. If you want, I'm going to stretch this out a little bit more. There we go. Next, we're going to have input. If we come back to the top, there's our input. I don't like just a standard white. If you come back, zoom out, we have kind of a darker background. And once again, that'll change again when we move to WordPress. So input, and I'm going to say a background of 69, 69, 69. That's just a coincidence for you sick-minded people. Border 1 pixel, C3, C3, C3. I'll go over all this in just a moment. Color, CB, 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 and padding of 3 pixels. All right, so once again, these values, background, that all came from just using the eyedropper tool and grabbing that value. The next one, border, same thing. There's a border around this. Let me zoom in so you can see it. Right there. You see that little border? Just use the eyedropper tool, grab that value, copy it, bring it back, C3, and paste it in. Same thing with the color. The color refers to the text when the user types into it. Like so. So if I wanted to change it to red, that'll be the text within the input. Okay? But we're definitely not using that. And then finally, padding. If I remove the padding, that gives the text some breathing room. So you see there? All right. Let's move on. We need to set, I want to set different styling for when the user is focusing on it, meaning when they've clicked in the input box, they are now focused on that. And also when they hover over the image. Once again, just to add a little more feedback. So input, hover. We separate each of them by a comma, and that way we're targeting more than one element. So we'll say background, ed, ed, ed. And this is just a value I determined. So we hover over it. I just selected a value that's lighter. It gives the user some idea to let them know that they can click. And what else? Color. We need to change the color because now it's going to be too bright to see. So 4E, 4E, 4E. If I hover over that, there you see. And you see I've set the color of the text to the original background, or, no I didn't, to the color of our anchor tags for consistency. Okay? Now, there we go. Looks good. Let's continue on. Let's do our main styling. So let's do main styles. And this is where I'm going to begin, the bread and butter stylings, like for my header and for my container and things like that. Let's begin with our wrap. When I designed this, I set a width right here of 960 pixels. It's a nice value that you'll see people use quite a bit. You can even measure that. If you're converting somebody's design, you can use the ruler tool and just measure and find out exactly how much it is. I know it's 960, so I'm going to do wrap. Remember, wrap is referring to the container that's wrapping our entire website. Wrap, okay? It's going to be a width of 960 pixels. And for the time being, I find it's easiest to get an idea of what I'm working with. Just give it a random background color. You can remove it later, red. So what I'm going to do here is in Firefox, we can zoom out just so that you can see the whole package a little bit better. All right? But we don't want it flush up against the left, do we? We want it to be centered on the website. And we can do that by setting the margins to auto. And that's essentially saying make your left margins and your right margins equal. And the only way you can make them equal is if it's perfectly centered on the page, like you can see here. So I'm going to leave that background on for now, but we'll come back and remove it shortly. The next step is the header. If you remember, there's our logo, but we want to make sure that we change the background so that it's pointing to that image that we sliced out. So let's do header, and we'll target the H1 first. And the background is going to be URL img/logo.png. That's how we saved it. Now, by default, when you set a background, it repeats itself, like you can see right here. So I want to say don't repeat, so no repeat. All right? Now, it's not showing up the whole thing, so how can we fix that? The best way is to set the width and height of the H1 tag exactly to what the width and height of the logo is. So if you need to, we can come back And let's do this once again. Let's select this. Or we could alternatively just open up the image. So copy, create a new, and you can remember it sets the width and height equal to what you copied. So we have 169 by 71. Come back and let's do that right now. Width 169, height of 71 pixels. And now you can see it's perfectly set. Now this red is hurting my eyes, so I'm going to remove that. You have the idea. What else on this H1 tag? You see we've added our background image, but we can still see if I zoom in, we're still showing the initial text. Now we don't want to remove that for semantic reasons, so we just want to get it off the page. We can use a property called text indent. You'll see this very much. It's referred to as image replacement. And we're just setting the indent to negative 10,000 to just force it off the page towards the left. Finally, I'm going to set the I'm going to set the float to left. And I'll show you a bit more why I'm doing that later. But you can see here now, when you float something, it doesn't take up any specific, it's not a block element anymore. That's why these list items came up, because no longer were they being forced below. And I'll explain that a little bit more in a bit. So let's continue on. Header H1A. I want to make sure that this is a link. Remember, this is going to link back to the home page. But if I hover over it, currently, I'm not getting anything. So how can we fix that? Let's do header H1A. And we set the width. Once again, I'm just going to make sure I set the width and height equal to exactly what its parent is. There are a couple ways to do that. And let's set the display to block. And if I hover over it now it's turned into an image. So the main thing here to keep in mind is that we set it to display to block. So technically, you might even be able to get away with removing the width and height completely. But I think it's safe just to make sure in all browsers it takes up all available space. And now that entire image is clickable. Pretty cool. So the next step is I would like to work on the navigation. So let's give this a name of navigation. And we'll begin by header UL. Let's come back to our code just in case you've forgotten. We have header and then UL. And the UL houses the home, about, contact, search, and the RSS. So let's begin with the UL. And I've set the overflow to hidden. Now I would like to go over something with you real quick. Let's set padding left to 83 pixels. It's a little bit unfair the way I'm showing you this because I have a reference that I've already done. Otherwise, this would take 10 hours to teach you. I want you to know it's not like I knew right off the bat to add overflow hidden. Well, actually, to rephrase that, yes, I did. But there are certain areas where you will come back to it. So it's not like I knew exactly to add display block. It's something you play around with it, then you go, okay, well, I'm going to go back to this element and add more. So if the overflow, if that's kind of hidden, you're like, oh, why did he have overflow? Specifically in that instance, to answer your question, it's because I knew I was going to be floating some of its children. That means floating these elements. And when you float an element, it essentially means that the parent element is taking up no space. And there's a hack where you apply overflow hidden to force the parent element to contain its floats. All right? But don't worry if you don't understand all of these. In a real world situation, you play around with things and you come back. All right, padding left to 83 pixels. And that was just to give it a little space from our image. And once again, that value actually came from measuring the distance between the border and here. Lots of ruler tool, especially when you're working for a client slicing up. Make sure you use the ruler tool because they need it exactly the way they designed it. Okay, header UL. Next, let's style our list items. So header UL LI. This is targeting all list items within the header div. I'm going to float them to the left because we want a navigational list. And now you see they're floated to the left, but they're all scrunched up together. So we can fix that by applying padding left of, once again, I measured this from the PSD, and I came to 40 pixels is about the distance. Next, I'm going to set margin right to 40 pixels as well. All right, and now we're getting some more room. What else? Margin top. You see how they're right up against the top of that? Let's zoom out a little more. I want to give it some breathing room. So margin top, 20 pixels. Go back to your PSD, measure that distance, and it should be right around 20 pixels. All right, we're slowly getting our navigation. Next, let's style the anchor tags. So header, UL, LI, A. And I know I want the color of these anchor tags to be slightly different. I want it to be CB, CB, CB. And that is because if you come back to Photoshop, the text here is kind of a lighter color. So you come here, once again, use your eyedropper tool, get that text color, copy it, paste it out. All right. What else? Font size. I want it to be a little bit bigger than 14 pixels. So I'm going to set it to 16 pixels, and you can see now they're a little bit larger, right? Zoom in, paste that in again. Why is that not showing up? Header, UL, LI, A. And you know, this is stuff that happens all the time. Let's set important. Or maybe it's already set to 16, 20. How strange. Why is it doing that? You guys might be able... Oh, of course. I'm sure you guys saw that. I didn't have my opening tag. Yeah, there it goes. I'm sure you guys have done that too. So let's set the font size to 16. And that's a little bit larger. Next, I'm going to set the position to relative. And the reason I'm doing that is because I know, if I come back to Photoshop, I know that I'm going to be using these little icons to the left of each one. And I want to position the text exactly where I want. And to do that, we need to set a position to relative. And that way we can use the top, left, right, and bottom properties to position it accordingly. So first, I'm going to set top of all of them to -7 pixels, left 3 pixels. Don't worry about this value too much. It'll come into play a little bit more. Hopefully, if I can remember, I'll come back to this after we've added our icons. So let's do one more thing. When they hover over the image, I don't want to add an underline, which is the default, so I'm going to remove that. But I do want to change the color to white. So if I hover over it, it should disappear because we have a white background. Yeah, but it's still there. All right. What next? Let's begin adding our icons. So header, UL, LI, and we gave it an ID of home. Remember, LI, ID, home. And we'll start by giving it a background, and it's going to point to that little home icon that we created. So IMG, and remember we placed it into a nav folder to stay organized. Nav, home.png. No repeat. There we go. Now, remember, once again, it's not tall enough, so we need to make sure that we set a specific height. And once again, to do that is you can just open up that icon, or you can just select it and do it kind of the hack way, creating a new layer, and we know it's 31 by 34 pixels. So I'm going to enter width, 31 pixels, height, 34 pixels. Now I'm not going to continue doing that manually because you guys now know how to get that value. Okay, so I already have them written down. I'm not going to go back. So next, let's do header, UL, LI. And this is why I gave each list item an ID. That way I can target it and target a specific list item. Background, URL, IMG, nav, about.png, no repeat. And this one is a little bit different. It's 37 pixels wide and 36 pixels high. Now that's not showing, and I believe, yeah, we didn't call it about, did we? We called it camera for some reason. Yeah, there it is. All right, and let's just copy this to save a little bit of time. Copy whenever you can. And this last one, we gave it an ID of contact. And change that from camera to contact. And the width is a little bit different. It's 35 pixels and 31. All right, so now we have our nice layout. So what I want to show you is coming back, and I'm going to remove these top and left values. When I spoke of coming back to the elements, this is what I was referring to. You see here, the image, the text is right next to its center. But if we come up, it's actually, the text is a little bit above, just a little bit above. So I came back and that's where I got those values. I moved them up slightly to my liking. Now we need to style the search box. So we can do, let's give it a name, search box, because we may come back to this often. li search, or we could do it the way we have been, header li with an ID of search. This is targeting this section right here. And I'm going to say margin top 13 pixels, margin left 60 pixels. We'll go over this shortly, and margin right none. All right, if you remember, why did I set margin right to 0? If you remember, if we come back, we already set margin right to 40 pixels on all list items, but I don't want that since it's the last one, so I zeroed that out. Where'd it go? Oh. Let's fix that. Not sure how that happened. Okay, and once again, margin top, I'm just bringing it down just a little bit. If we remove that to give you an idea, look at the top. There you see. And now you might be wondering, how come I set the margin top to 13 pixels, but when we remove it, it moves down? Shouldn't it move up? No. The reason it moved down is because by default, we set the margin top to 20 pixels. So we actually reduced that margin top. All right. Next, header li search, and this time we're going to target the image. And remember, I told you when we move to WordPress, I'm going to change this into a background image. But for the time being, it's an actual image that we can target with CSS. And we'll say, add some more margins. You know, I know this is kind of boring to watch, but it's essential to slicing up a design. All right. And that's just positioning our icon exactly where we want it. So if I remove that, you can see. All right. What's next? The input, the actual input. You see it's kind of below, and I want to move that up. So header li search input. And we'll set the position to relative in order to adjust the top value. And we'll set the top to negative 32 pixels. And once again, I kind of played around with the value until I got to where I wanted. And that even looks a little high for my taste. Maybe we'll fix that later, because I would probably bring it down lower. So I'm guessing maybe I apply margins later to fix that. We'll come back. Header, ul, or li with an ID of RSS to affect our RSS icon, which we have right there. And with this one, I want to float it all the way to the right. You can see there. And let's also zero out the margins, because I don't want any margin or padding from this list item. And there you see. Now it's kind of jumped up. And what else? RSS. And let's target the image that's within it. And we're going to set a width of it to 30 pixels. Padding right, and just 1 pixel. And that's because it was just slightly overflowing off of our wrapper div. So I needed to give it a padding. And this is just sometimes a little quirk where I don't know exactly why we needed to do that. Technically, we shouldn't have had to, but you know, sometimes you just need to play around with things a little bit. And that's what I did. And then margin top to 13 pixels as well. All right, and that's set to the exact value that our search form is. And that way they have the correct value. Okay, so we're getting there. Next, I want to work on our slogan. And if you remember, the slogan is this section right there. Another rarely updated blog. Because I work on 2 blogs and 2 sites, I just have very little time to maintain a 3rd blog, though I do my best. So we have PID equals slogan, another rarely updated blog. So we need to target a paragraph with an ID of slogan. Header, P with an ID of slogan. Now technically, if we wanted, all we would really be required is slogan. But I find when I come back to my documents, it's easier if I forget what slogan is, I can go, oh, that's a paragraph element that's within the header. It's just easier for me to remember. We're going to do quite a few things with this. Just for the record, this is referring to this section right there. Okay, let's click off that. And I'm going to set a font size to 2 ems. Make it a little bit bigger. What next? I want the font to be bold, although we're using image replacement, that's not altogether necessarily. Actually, that's not necessary at all. I'm going to get rid of that. What's next? Margin is 21 pixels on top, 0 on the right, 31 pixels on the bottom, 0 on the left. So I'm essentially just giving some spacing from the top here and from our main section. It's still not in the right position though. And the way we can fix that is we want to float it to the right, all the way to the right. Now, so you see here, why did this jump up? It's because we took it out of the order by floating it. And remember when I said the parent element is no longer containing that float? If you're new to CSS, this might be a little confusing. But the way to fix it is by applying overflow hidden to the parent div. So we'll come back and fix that shortly. Let's continue with this until we're done. I'm going to set a background, and we're going to replace it with that image that we cut out. So URL img/slogan.png. No repeat. Now you can see it right there on the back. Let's do our little text indent trick again. Text indent, negative 9,999 pixels. And we also want to set a width and height equal to exactly what this was. Copy, and it's 542 by 36. Width, and I actually got a different value. I got 544 by 38 when I did it on mine. So we'll figure that out later. And text indent. Now, the only other thing we have here is you see this little white border? I did that because sometimes I think it's nice. I'm hardly a designer. I prefer development much more. But I think it's nice to reinforce your lines whenever you can. So that's what I'm doing here, is reinforcing that boundary. We can mimic that by doing border right, 1 pixel, solid white. You can see it. You can't see it because of our background, but trust me, it's there. And then finally, actually, let's do this for now. Let's set the body background of gray. And now you can see it. And let's come back down. We'll remove that later. But you see it's still flush up against the image. Let's add some padding to the right to give some spacing. So padding right, 50 pixels. And now, can you see there? Much better. So I said one way that we can clear the float is to apply overflow hidden to the parent div. Another way is to take the next element on the list. So let's come here. We're done with our header completely. So the other way would be to grab this div with an ID of main and set clear, the property clear to left or both. And that's saying clear any floats that are above it. So let's see how that fixes it. By the way, we are working with the div with an ID of main. So let's do main content. I'm going to say main, that div that we just selected, clear both. Aha, did you see that? It's now completely cleared this another rarely updated blog float. Pretty neat. What else? Overflow hidden. I'm implementing both techniques. Now this has nothing to do with the another rarely updated blog image. This is referring to, I'm going to be floating, let's zoom out, this primary section and the secondary section are both going to be floated to the left and right respectively. And once again, when you float, you need to make sure that you clear it, and we're going to use that trick that I spoke of by applying overflow hidden. All right, so let's begin working on our primary section, and that's the main content that has the main blog info. So main primary, that's the name of the div we gave it. I'm going to float it to the left like I spoke of. All right. Now, you're not going to see any difference just yet, and that is because it's still taking up all available space. So we need to give it a specific width. And the width I came to was 630 pixels. There you go. And once again, the way I got that was I grabbed my ruler and I measured how far it is from here to here. Okay, and I was working on a grid, so I already knew that that was 630 pixels. All right. And now you see, by setting a width, we floated this one to the left, and now the sidebar pops up. Now let's do a little bit of styling for the secondary or the sidebar. Secondary. And I'm going to do float right, just to ensure that it's floated. And I'm going to set width to 300 pixels. All right, and now I just kind of added that width to make sure it's exactly that. So now we have 930 pixels. It's a 960 pixel layout, so we have 30 pixels of padding that we can apply between right here, between the primary and the secondary. Moving along, let's now style each of these post items. If you remember, we gave each item on our blog a class of post item. And just to make sure you know, I'm referring to this right here. That was given a class of post item for each one of those. So let's do div with a class of post item. And let's target this a little bit better just in case we have specificity issues. Main, primary, post item. All right. I want to begin by giving it a background of ed, ed, ed. All right, and that is the color that we got right from the background here. But it's all jumbled together, and it's because we zeroed out those margins. We'd like there to be some space between each one. So let's add a margin bottom to each one, margin bottom, and I measured it to be 28 pixels when I used the ruler tool. And now you can see we have some nice spacing. The next step is to apply a border. If you come here and we zoom in, you'll see each one of these has a white border around it. You see that? So let's add that in. Border, 1 pixel solid white. And now you can see that white pixel. And remember, we aren't going to have this gray background. I'm going to remove that shortly. What next? Give me just a moment. Speaking of this gray background, we need to go ahead and add that little background that we cut out. So I'm going to stop right here, go back to body, and let's go into main styles right up here, and let's go body, and we're going to add that image on. So if you remember, it's background, F2, F2, F2. We'll explain that a little bit more shortly. But the URL is going to be img/bg.jpg is what we called it. Now in this case, we do want it to repeat, so I'm going to set repeat to X. We don't want to repeat it vertically, but we do want to repeat it horizontally. And I can go back to the very top and remove this background gray. Come back, scroll down, and now let's zoom all the way out, and you can see we have this image. Now, what about this F2 background that we have right here? I got that value by going into my bg.jpg image. And if you remember, it ended right about here. I opened the image, I used my eyedropper tool, and I figured out what the hex value was at the very bottom of that image. And then I set the background of the body equal to that value. That way, when the image ends, we just take over. So let's, for instance, to give you an example, let's set red. The image ends right here. So we'd have this big red, but by setting the background equal to the color of the image at the very bottom, we can kind of seamlessly move into the body background. All right, so you can see we're actually doing a pretty good job of getting there. It's taken a while, but we're doing a good job. So I'm going to go back down into our post item, and we're going to continue on. Once again, I know I'm going to be floating this image within the post item to the left, so I'm going to set overflow to hidden. There we go. And what else? I would also like to add some padding to the right of 40 pixels. All right. So did you see what that happened right there? I'm giving some padding just to get this text off the edge. And we'll come back and modify that some more, especially when we move to WordPress. Post item, image. This is going to target the featured image for each post. And I'm going to say float it to the left like I spoke of. And now all the text is going to jump up. All right. Padding all around this. We're going to get 30 pixels on the top, 20 on the right, 30 on the bottom, 30 on the left. And now you can see we gave some nice spacing. That's very important that you give plenty of spacing so your text isn't too cramped. And then finally, I decided to add a border top 1 pixel solid white. And that is going to apply, you can barely see it. Scroll down. But there's actually no, that's not right. The border top is being applied all the way up here. And that's because borders are applied around the padding. So why don't we try something different? Let's set padding top to 0, but margin top to 30. And no, because that's still applying. What if we, give me just a minute, this is how you work. Let's try, can we get away with using margins all around? No, we can't. I'm going to zoom out. There are ways to get around this, but for now, let's just leave it as is. We don't really need that border, and we're going to change it when we move to WordPress. Okay, so post item image. Let's next target the H2, which is this section right here. All right, H2. Post item H2. And I'm going to say padding top 30 pixels. And that's going to bring, now that value is the same as the padding top of the image. That way they're lined up correctly. Post item P with a class of meta. That is referring to, right here, this has the date information. So if we come back to Photoshop, you'll remember we had this red background and white text. So let's set that up right now. Background, and I sampled that red color, and it came out to 9C2323, like so. But you see it's extending all the way, so how can we fix that? There's a couple ways. One would be setting display to inline, and that fixes it, but then we can't apply margin. So, for example, if I wanted to shift this text below it down, watch, margin padding at the bottom, 100 pixels, it's not going to work. And if I try padding bottom at the same time, it's still not going to work. So I'm not going to use display inline in this scenario. We'll come to it in a minute. Let's do color. We know the color should be white, like I spoke of. And I want the font size to be 11 pixels. Font style, I set to normal. I'm not sure, by default it is normal, so I don't know why I did that. I'm going to leave it in there, but I don't think that changed anything, so you might be able to remove that particular property. We want some breathing room for the text, so let's give it 4 pixels all around. Margin left, I'm going to use margins to push this over, so I'm going to set 250 pixels. And now 250 is equal to the width of the image, which is 200, plus the left plus the right. So we know the left is 30 pixels, so now we're at 230, and there's 20 pixels of padding between this image and the beginning of the text, and that's how it lines up perfectly. And that's the method I chose. Now, I want some spacing before the text begins, so let's set margin bottom to 14 pixels, and that'll push that text down. And we'll do it even more when we move to WordPress. Width is going to be 100 pixels. That way we can specify it. But what if the category is much longer? I want to set minimum width as well to 100 pixels. And that way it'll expand in modern browsers. And then finally, let's align the text to the center. And that'll make sure the text is perfectly centered within this little box rectangle that we created. And then finally, I'm going to set a border bottom. And I did solid white. I don't think I can do that again. Let's zoom in. I set padding all around the text. I also set a border bottom. That is working. Interesting. You probably can't see it on the screencast, but I would think that the border would apply just a little bit lower, but no, I guess not. Yeah, that makes sense. Of course it wouldn't. So let's zoom out again, and that's just a very small feature that adds just a little bit of depth. All right, post item P. Post item P. This is going to style the intro text that we have right here. And the color is going to be 7E, 7E, 7E. All right, and I just brought the text lighter. And the font style, I want it to be italic. All right, there we go. And next, we are going to style the more and previous button. The styling for the post items is great, but we need to style this right there. So what I need to do is we haven't sliced this out like I thought we did. So I'm going to grab this, click on it, find the more button, but I don't want any of this text within it. So I'm going to deselect that, copy that, and do it like we become accustomed to. And the reason I'm not just setting a background color is because there is a slight gradient going on here. So JPG is good. And we should save this as next prev button. All right, hide that and return. Let's do next and previous buttons. We'll be using this in WordPress quite a bit. We gave it a class of more, I believe. Let's come back, or did I even do that? Looks like I didn't. So let's come back and edit our code. After the final box, we're going to add an anchor tag, and it's going to be, let's give it a class so that I can target it. So class will be more, and the value is going to be, we'll just set it more. We'll change that later. Something like that. Okay. Now it's a good practice, just in case your browser crashes, to copy this temporarily and bring it and paste it in, just in case, just so that you don't lose anything. All right. So I'm going to refresh the page. Let me make sure sticky is on. Yeah. Refresh this page, and now you can see that the more link is showing up. We're going to style that right now. We gave it a class of more. And I'm going to set it a background color, and it's going to point to that image that we had, URL, img/next prev buttons.jpg, no repeat. I think that's right. Maybe not. Let's come back to next prev buttons. There it is. Get rid of that, and now it's showing up. So let's continue with our styling. Padding, more breathing room all around the text. It's very important. Color is white. Font size is 12 pixels. Font style is italic. We're going to float it to the right, so I want to shift it all the way to the right of its container div. Next is border. 1 pixel solid white, I believe. Yeah. And you can barely see it, but I'm going to do a little more just to add some more depth. Border right is none, and border left. So it's only going to apply that to the top and bottom. Okay, and you probably can't even see that with this screencast. So we are done with our main section. Great job. We're doing a good job here. Let's continue on and move to our secondary area. Secondary/sidebar. And we'll start by, we gave each of these little widgets, which we'll be calling them in the future, we gave it a class of secondary box. So secondary box. And let's style each of those boxes. So background, I measured this in Photoshop, and I found a background color to be ED, ED, ED. In the future, we're actually going to add more of a subtle gradient to make it look better. So once again, there we go. But we need to add some margins to give each of them their own space. So let's set the margin bottom equal to exactly what it was in our main section, which was 28 pixels. There you go. What else? Some padding. None on the top and bottom, but 4% padding on the left and right. And when we move to WordPress, I'm going to increase that to 8%. More breathing room equals better. But we'll leave that at 4 for now. And overflow hidden, we're going to be floating elements within it. So let's add overflow hidden to be safe. And we also want to apply this theme of a white pixel border around it. And can you see that? I think you should be able to see that. And now you see how that little line, it reinforces the layout. All right, I think that's pretty good for our secondary box. Photos, IMG. So what is photos img? You know, I kind of forget this stuff too. Let's come back, and we have post item. What we need to do is I need to be able to target each one of these widgets. So we have a class to apply the global stylings, but we also want to apply individual stylings as well. So I'm going to come back to our secondary section that you see right here. And within the class, I'm also going to give them an ID. So let's do ID for this little Flickr photos section, photos. Popular entries, this next one. I'm not going to do anything there, but this bottom one, recent entries, let's also give that an ID of recent entries. Save it. Refresh the page. Okay, so now photos is referring to this section right in here. So photos img, and I'm going to remove any border that might be around that photo, that image, and photos img with a class of featured image. If you remember, I applied that class right here, okay? And that has that tree photo. So we're targeting that one directly, because the only reason I've done it this way is because we also have these little left and right arrow images, and we don't want to affect them as well. Border, 1 pixel, solid white. Add that back in. Margin 0, I'm going to zero out any margin and padding that might be on this image from ancestor elements. And then width, I want it to be 100%. Okay, and that's altogether not really necessary, just in case maybe a user adds an image that's not the correct width. We're just going to stretch it out, no big deal. Photos P, target the paragraph. Elements, float to the left, because we want the arrows to be on the right. And color, I measured this in Photoshop, and it came out to 737373. Okay, there we go. And photos, prev next, float right. Remember, we gave this a wrapping class of prev next, and that's how we targeted both the right and the left arrow. All right. Now let's target all H3 tags, because we want them. Open up Photoshop. Close that out. At least for the HTML version, we want the H3 tags to have this red background. I ultimately decided that's a little too intense and I wanted to remove it, but we're going to keep this consistent. Secondary box, all of those, with an H3 tag. And you know what I'm going to do to keep things a bit more organized is I'm going to grab that and move it up here to our global styling section. All right, and I'm going to set the background to 9C2323, which is that red again. All right, color is going to be white. Margin is 4% on the top and bottom, but 0 on the left and right. All right, and that gives it just a little bit of breathing room. What next? Font size. Let's reinforce it to 12 pixels. Font weight, normal. It doesn't need to be bold. So I'm removing the default weight on a heading 3 tag. And padding. 3 pixels on the top, 0. And this is kind of playing around with it. I didn't immediately pull these out of my head. I played around with it. So 3 on the top, 0 on the right, 2 on the bottom, and 8 on the left, just to give that text its own. And remember, we're zoomed out, so if I zoom back in, you can see what it looks like completely. All right. What next? The popular posts. I'm looking at my notes, and it looks like I left off a class in here. So remember, this is supposed to be popular entries. What I did was I gave this UL an ID of pop posts. That way I can target it this specific area. So I'm going to copy that, save it, refresh my page so the changes take effect, and now I can go into it. So let's continue on, and we're going to say secondary box, our little widget, grab the UL with an ID of pop posts, and we're going to target all of the list items within it. And we're going to float them to the left. Actually, you know what? I realized what my error was. If you go back to Photoshop, I was originally using images, okay, like a little sample image. I ultimately decided not to do that. So we can actually remove, I think we can remove that entirely. If need be, we'll come back to it. Sorry about that delay. Recent entries, ULLI. Background. The background was going to be this little image right here. You see those? I ultimately decided when I first recorded this, we don't need those little red things, so let's get rid of them. We don't need it. Let's set padding for each list item to 3 pixels on the top, 0 on the right, 3 pixels on the bottom, 30 on the left. Now, once again, we need to modify this slightly because we're not going to have that little bullet point anymore. So we can set that to 0. All right. What else? Border bottom to separate each list item. 1 pixel solid, and I measured this, B, 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 B. All right. But a cool little technique that you guys may not be familiar with to add a little more depth here is to also apply a border top of 1 pixel solid white. There you go. Can you immediately see how it looks like a divot? So if I remove that, hopefully you can see it in the screencast. It's gray. It's just kind of flat. Now it's flat. But when I add it back on, we create the illusion of that depth. Now, we need to fix something, though. If we look here, we've applied a border top, but we don't want a border at this very first list item. So there are some advanced CSS techniques we can use. Not advanced, but modern browsers support them, is what I mean. So recent entry ULLI, and we can do colon to do a pseudo class first dash child. And watch this. We're going to set border top to none. And we got rid of it. We need to do the same thing to get rid of that line at the bottom as well. So recent entries. Now this, unfortunately, IE does not support this the way we would hope. So we'll have to use jQuery ultimately to accomplish this effect. Border bottom. So first child and last child. There's also an nth child, so it's really kind of a cool feature that we can slowly begin using. And I only want to do just a little bit more. Recent entries, ULLIA. We're targeting all the anchor tags, and it looks like I'm resetting that to 12 pixels. I don't think that's necessary. Get rid of that. So copy that. Oh, maybe it is. Give me just a moment. Redo. Let's try that again because it looks like it went down. Yeah, I'm sorry. It did go down. So I should probably apply the same thing to the popular entries. So why don't we do this? Recent entries. ULLIA, and I'm going to do comma. Now we're going to make this a little more streamlined, but for now we'll do UL pop posts LI. And now we're applying the border to this one as well. Don't worry though, we'll fix this later. Pop posts LI first child. And we're using once again a comma to separate these. Last child. There we go. So I'm going to copy all of this we have here, come back in, paste it into my style.css file, save it, and I'm going to close this out, refresh the page, and now you can see now I'm on a very tiny screen. And I've already seen a mistake I made. I do not see the little glow that another updated blog has. It had a white pixel border. So I'm going to come back here, and we're going to fix that. So click on it, another updated blog, and the effect. So when we copied it, we just copied the text. So if you ever want to apply the effect as well, we could do something like a create layer, and that creates a layer out of the effect. And then we can select that and the layer it created, merge them, and now business as usual. Whoops. Paste it in. Deselect it, and now it has that border. save it for the web, and we are just going to simply save it as a 24-bit ping to get the transparency, save, and I'm going to, what did we call that? Slogan, right? Slogan, save, replace, hide, refresh, and now we've added our border. So on a normal screen, this would look something more like that, at least on my screen. But I'm on a low resolution, and we have successfully converted our Photoshop file. Close that out. Our Photoshop file has successfully been turned into a working static website. So that was a very long, what are we on, part 4 or part 5? I have no idea. But in the next section, we are going to finally start with WordPress, which is probably what you've been waiting for. So thanks for watching. You guys are doing a great job if you're working along. Bye-bye.